Okay, thanks. Thanks for the questions and thanks for the session. I will invite Professor Nirmalya Narayan Chakraborty to deliver his talk.
Can I go there? Thank you very much. Let me extend my sincere thanks to Enak Khidi for inviting me on this occasion. The general, point that I would like to argue for in this talk is during our student days, we were taught by our teachers not to conflate the idea of transcendental with the idea of transcendent, including my teacher who is sitting here. I am not questioning this, but I would like to show that a philosopher could very well construct a passage from the idea of transcendental in Kantian sense or in Husserlian sense to the idea of transcendent. So there is a passage that we can think of. And one of the major consequences of this construction of passage from the idea of transcendental to the idea of transcendent is to argue for philosophy as a spiritual activity in a very respectable sense. One need not raise one's eyebrows whenever one uses the word spiritual in the context of philosophical analysis. And I tried to argue along this line in another paper on Jain Mohanty. Professor Chakraborty is aware of that, banking on some ideas of Mohanty on the possibility of transcendental phenomenology, as well as banking on some comments that Husserl made towards the end of his career to his some close associates. So here I am banking on K.C. Bhattacharya for doing this. And I think, looking at Kantian transcendental and attempt to sort of derive certain interesting conclusions by improving on the Kantian idea of transcendental is not only unique to K.C. Bhattacharya. I think there are other Indian philosophers who have also tried to hint at this way of looking at. If there is one project to which Kant devoted his entire life, then this consists in explaining the philosophical foundation of scientific knowledge of his time and to account for our knowledge of morals. Both are important to Kant, and he claims to be connected with these two in the immediate consciousness of his existence. Kant, however, does not attempt to reduce freedom to a mechanistic universe characteristic of the physical science of his time, nor does he rest freedom on a so-called rational insight into an objectively perfect world. For Kant, both the laws of the heavenly bodies and those of morals can seek their validity in the legislative power of the human mind. Insofar as the laws of physical science are concerned, we ascribe the basic scientific laws to the natural events given to our senses. And yet, since we ourselves ascribe these laws, we are free to look at the world from a perspective where we are agents and we have the freedom to choose the course of action, and these actions of ours are not predicted based on mechanistic laws. There's one very interesting comment that K.C. Bhattacharya made in his, that rather longish paper on Kant. I won't elaborate on it, but I just thought that it's an important comment that KCV makes vis-a-vis Kant's position. He says that if the self as the agent of knowledge thus stays outside the realm of knowledge, then self is not knowable. It is an object of moral faith. This is how KCB understands Kant. This prompts K.C. Bhattacharya to claim, this is important, that the self is knowable without thought. This is something, a very interesting comment that KCB makes. If philosophy consists of beliefs that are speakable and systematically communicable, then they are expressions of what KCB calls theoretic consciousness. This is KCB's expression. And so is science. But then there are grades of theoretic consciousness, starting from the empirical thought to transcendental thought. Note here, KCB uses the word transcendental in the sense of moving beyond the subjective-objective binary, as we shall see in details a little later. Empirical thought is born of reference to an object perceived or imagined to be perceived. Objectual reference forms the meaning of the content of empirical thought. This is where KCB locates science. But the next stage is called pure objective thought, to quote KCB, where there is a reference to the object, but this reference need not involve any sense perception. Empirical pull is not manifest here. Then comes spiritual thought, where there remains no object centricity, only an attitude of entertaining. KCB calls it enjoying attitude. Very interesting expression. I'm yet to grasp the proper significance of this. There's an enjoying attitude. Here the subject shines forth. This stage culminates in a finer stage where even the veiled reference to the object ceases to exist. And so the binary of subject-object dissolves. This is called transcendental thought by KCB. These grades of thought are also grades of speakability. I think as a philosopher of language, we should also take note of that. In the empirical thought, speakability involves factual information. But from objective thought till transcendental thought, speakability releases itself from the clutches of factual information and is understood as spoken of as self-evident philosophic content, to use KCB's expression. This self-evidence forms the part of the meaning itself of these different grades of thought. There is no factual information and so no judgment proper where the predicate provides information about the subject. If this is the realm of philosophy, then philosophical truths are spoken and not spoken of, to quote KCB. They are symbolically speakable. So in that sense, philosophy consists of symbolically speakable. Thus, a philosophy is said to consist of three grades of theoretic consciousness, namely pure objective thought, spiritual thought, and transcendental thought. Then philosophy, as a study of the subjective, independent of its banking on the vagaries of the objective reference, certainly could be called a spiritual discipline. Let me explain what this philosophical spiritualism consists of. As it is usually done, man in classical Indian philosophy is thought of as having two aspects, the material or the natural aspect and the spiritual aspect. The natural side consists of elements, acts, and dispositions that belong to man's physical body, either originating directly from the body through the mind or from the external world. The spiritual side, on the other hand, consists of elements that do not have their origins in the physical body and the external world. These two aspects remain in close relation. Though the exact nature of this relation is a matter of intense dispute, one could start the discourse by proposing that it is the unique I feeling, ahang, buddhi, that characterizes one's body and mind and whatever alternations happen there. Even in the unreflective stage, the presence of I feeling could be assumed, even though not pronounced, and one could distinguish one's own bodily and mental changes from those of others. Even if the I feeling is inalienably related to the physico-mental complex, it is possible for the I, through progressive reflection, to dissociate itself from the entanglement of nature. And after this dissociation, what remains in the unreflective stage are the physico-mental changes and the external world with no I-hood or mindness, mamakara buddhi, attached to it. Although normally the material and the spiritual side remain fused with each other, this fusion can be dissociated through progressive reflection, where the physico-mental complex undergoes subtler and subtler changes, and only at the highest stage the split could be discovered in its entirety. One has to be, however, careful in formulating the nature of the unity of spirit and matter that constitutes man. If this is simply a matter of togetherness, then it would imply that we are aware of these two elements in man in their exclusivity. It, however, is not possible to experience the two in their distinctness. We are not sure what there was in the name of the spirit whose departure has turned the body into a dead matter, nor are we sure of what the matter is, even if, to whatever extent, it could be dissociated. Matter, once the spirit appropriates it, bears the mark of the spirit's conceptual repertoire. In this picture, spiritual realization is not a mystery. At the reflective stage, when one looks at pain, for example, from a distance, as it were, and consequently he tolerates it, as he does not own it, even if the pain is his. At every stage in the progressive dissociation, the earlier lower stage that is transcended is retrospectively viewed as the stage where the spirit was not present the way it is present in the higher stage. At every stage, the two sides, though distinct, come to be related to each other. This progressive dissociation of spirit is to be understood in its proper perspective. In a way, my body is an item of nature like many other items. And this body can be explained by the experts the same way other items of nature can be explained. But the same body is treated as unique and disparate when I treat it as my body and look at it with a delicate fondness. Although a part of nature, my living body seems to have an autonomy that the spirit possesses. And in this sense, my body is more spiritual than other items of nature. The larger implication of this is that, except in the final stage, where the dissociation is final and the spirit exists in its self-containedness, during all the earlier stages of dissociation, the spirit carries the matter with it, though at every stage the matter gets thinner and thinner. It is undeniable that knowledge refers to an item in nature in the sense that natural item acts as a causal determinant. But the act of referring is knowledge's own function, implying that the knowledge might not also refer at least the way it wants. This is evident in an illusory experience where knowledge refers to another item, or in a hallucination where knowledge creates its object, which is not a causal determinant of that very knowledge. Similar is the case in constructive imagination and thinking, where knowledge is not determined by nature, but rather it moves by itself, introspective awareness, though necessarily dependent on first-level mental acts, is not causally determined by nature. Introspection in this sense could be called over-natural. More importantly, though introspection refers to the first-level mental experience, it does so freely. Introspection is not obligated to refer to it. One could also talk about dissociation of the spirit insofar as the volitional aspect of human behavior is concerned. However, the dissociation of the volitional spirit would take a different direction from that of the cognitive spirit. In cognitive dissociation, the spirit gradually withdraws itself from the naturalistic bondage. This is not true of volition, for volition by its nature is directed to nature. Volition, generally speaking, consists in making some attempt to bring change in nature following a rule and with a definite purpose. In this circumstance, the volitional dissociation, in order to realize the spirit in it, consists in gradual withdrawal from all kinds of naturalistic treatment of both the body and the extra-bodily nature serving my naturalistic interests. One step removed, man distinguishes himself from animals by transcending his bare biological interests. Even if at this stage human behavior is conscious, if not self-conscious, human reactions are fully determined by the natural forces of attachment and aversion. This self-consciousness further demands to move beyond the shackles of natural determination towards the realization of the spirit proper. This dissociation of the spirit manifests itself in disinterested action but without detachment, that Professor Miri was referring to this morning. One could similarly talk about progressive dissociation of the spirit regarding feeling and emotion. Some philosophers have worked out in detail more and more subtle forms of this emotive life of man that might take while undergoing the progressive dissociation of the spirit. If the picture that has been sketched so far concerning the nature of man as expressed in classical Indian philosophical schools is a tenable one, then it suggests that the essence of spirit in man lies in its progressive dissociation from the natural present in man. But this dissociation is not at the cost of the value that the natural in man contributes. In a normal talk of dissociation, separation takes place, ignoring one of the parties in the divorce. Some kind of disparity is the mark of dissociation that we talk about in common parlance. This could be called exclusive dissociation. The classical Indian philosophers, at least the way I read KCB's understanding of some of the classical Indian philosophical ideas, while talking about dissociation, they are more inclined to talk about what could be called inclusive dissociation. Perhaps barring some of the metaphysicians having a strong leaning towards a monistic worldview, a large number of philosophers of classical India took great interest in the naturalistic methodology while overcoming the natural. When they talk about dissociation of the spirit, this is an inclusive dissociation in the sense that in the different stages of progressive dissociation, the natural gets thinner and thinner, and as a result, the natural gets transformed. And this subject proper, quote unquote, can be realized through a mental exercise. Even the common talk about detachment hints at gradual withdrawal, not in the sense of inaction, but in the sense of being unmoved by the results of action. With this progressive detachment, one comes to experience more and more what is essential to him. So if the idea of subject proper is a metaphysical backup on the Indian view of identification, then such a metaphysics can have practical application through a certain course of training. In a larger context, freedom can be viewed as a choice to submit or not to the given. And the given could be either empirical circumstances in which the person happens to be placed, or tendencies originating within. We sometimes do not succumb to empirical pressure even when it is very strong. The I feeling manifests in this choice of not submitting is a full-blooded one. The agency raises its head in full glory in the exercise of this choice. This aspect of freedom, KCV's famous work is entitled Subjectivity as Freedom. This aspect of freedom, where man executes his ability not being limited by the given alternatives, is what constitutes freedom as transcendence. Man is thrown, so to speak, in this world of contingencies, and himself becomes part of the natural world. But man's freedom allows him not to surrender to nature. Man refuses to yield to nature because, after all, some of the empirical givens stand in the way of realizing the intimate nature of man. And this is the essence of all the moral and spiritual lessons. Morals in its details is an attempt to organize natural givens in such a manner so that man can exercise his freedom in not resigning himself to the given. Man has this onus on him in not giving in to nature. Morality then consists in exercising this freedom, and failure to do this leads one to not being moral. A man might falter in not succumbing to the given, but the journey of man's civilization is the story of man's unwavering attempt to exercise his ability not to resign to nature. Reorganization of the empirical given is also an attempt on man's part to fulfill his inner call. The more a man exercises this ability, the more moral he becomes and the closer he gets to his inner core. Insofar as man tries to transcend the given, he exercises his freedom in its negative sense. Insofar as man reorganizes the given and positively constructs something out of it, he can be said to exercise his positive freedom. In the sensuous awareness of the given, along with its associates, when man analyzes, judges, and constructs theories of the given, he is already in the realm of cognitive freedom. Our emotional freedom consists in expressing our sentiments in works of art and religion that have their own dynamics. Volitional freedom is exercised when man is not driven by desire directed to the empirical given. If having a description of the act, including the idiom of intention, is the mark of agency, then an analysis of the I feeling accompanying the intentional choice is required. This is where one could introduce the idea of freedom from the given, freedom as transcendence. This freedom from has its echo in the classical Indian concept of detachment or vairagya and the positive course of action to realize this ideal, which is sometimes called practice or abhyasa. All the actions accompanied by I feelings are, in an important sense, initiated by inclination, raga, or aversion, dvesha. The first stage of freedom in actions accompanying I feeling consists in feeling, in internal perception in the language of classical Indian philosophy, that the action or will concern has occurred in the subject herself. The next level consists of action through detachment, which consists of free refusal to submit to the given determinants. Philosophers in classical Indian tradition have referred to different facilitators in bringing out this detachment, namely cognition, volition, and emotion. At least these are the three aspects that KCB talks about, and also, his son, another famous philosopher, Kalidas Bhattacharya, also has dealt with these in great details. Some hold that once this detachment is brought out, it gets an autonomous status in man, so that it acquires a relatively independent status, not requiring constant backup from the facilitators. If detachment is the negative aspect of freedom, then the manifestation of the pure intimate nature of man becomes the summum bonum of human life. I think this is how, at least in my reading of K.C. Bhattacharya, he appropriates some of the content insights in his larger classical Indian philosophical framework. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Nirmalya Narayan. And I'm sure that the audience is dying to ask questions. Professor Mukherjee.
This is what.
Thank you, see, I didn't quite follow the middle and the later talk. So I will just take the first part. Just one point, actually, the idea of passage from transcendental to transcendent, as you said, or which you link up to some idea of gradation, as if there are grades of what? Well, you indicate a speakability. That's one thing. So, grades of consciousness, grades of living, grades of thinking, and grades of speakability. So there are grades and passages, transfers. I just want to confirm that idea. I certainly remember one passage from his time, we referred all the time here, actually. I think it's in the Blue and I will know. So, when he says that one suffers the illusion when listening or singing some notes of music, one suffers the illusion as saying something. It denies speakability. Okay. Music is what? You whistle. In some other places, you know, you whistle. So that's what you say, if you like. Okay. So there need not be grades of speakability in the sense of using a natural language, let's say. Okay. Music is music, science is science, philosophy is philosophy. What I'm trying to suggest here, from my very old-fashioned Humean disposition, that instead of grades, why can't we simply talk of plurality?
Okay.
The human existence is just modular in character. We do these things and we do that thing. Sokal যখন হাঁটতে যাই জঙ্গলে, so we have one kind of experiences living, maybe one kind of some sense of speakability in a rather metaphorical sense. Okay. Some thoughts occupy. That's one thing. But when I listen to music, classical music, something else, why should there be grades? Why should there be passages? That's the only worry. Why not just different things?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Nirmalya Sudha. Yes. The reason I sort of, picked on this idea of grades is because, he was trying to, decipher the realm of philosophy vis-a-vis the realm of science. This is very clear in the concept of philosophy, this article. And that's why he thinks that, in philosophy, we are not concerned with judgments proper, because judgments do have factual information, which is the realm of science. Okay, and that is why I think he talks about symbols, symbolically spoken of. Well, spoken of we shouldn't say, because spoken of means, you are speaking of some bit of factual information in the world. So the reason I think we can talk about grades, and it's, at least as I understand him, it does make sense, because from factual world, when you gradually sort of move towards finally to that to that level where the very subject-object binary collapses. I mean, this is where you find what they call subject proper. Subject proper in the sense the subject which is kind of which is autonomous in its own religion, in its own region, without being determined by any factual information.
When I'm listening to Amir Khan, for example, or listening to Amir Khan, is it on? When I'm listening to Amir Khan or someone else, or Beethoven or whatever, I'm not moving away from quantum mechanics. I'm just in a different sphere, if you like, different phase of life. I'm not moving away or framing grades. Similarly, when I do, I'm not a very religious person, but I do feel certain kinds of thoughts, if you want. Okay, they need not be thoughts in a specific human language. Okay, when I visit Hamid Khusru's, say, tomb, for example, okay, there are certain points. I like to spend some time there. Okay, like to cover my head. Okay, I like to do all these things. The similar thing I felt when I went to McLeodganj recently. Okay, so, but why should there be, moving away from one to get to another kind of thing? That's what I don't. Where is this transfer taking place?
For me, I'm interested in these grades because I'm interested in showing that, philosophy, in a significant sense, could be called a spiritual exercise, and where we can have access to the subject proper.
I'm fine. That's okay. But why the grade?
And interesting, because since you brought in the example from music, he calls it the enjoying attitude. I am still, not clear about what exactly he means by this. I mean, in that level, the subject entertains an enjoying attitude. Okay, I mean, where there are no determinants from the natural world. Okay, so it's like, it's completely autonomous in its own way. I don't know whether, I'm not sure whether I should use subject is shut up in its own realm. But that is something, I'm interested in. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I think Professor Chakraborty wanted to ask a question. I saw his hand. Yes. Yes, please. Another quick question and a quick answer.
I really learned a lot from Nirmalya. But just one warning about any project which is seductive for us of extending Kant to KCB, which he himself does, is that there's a very radical change in KCB that he doesn't hide. According to Kant, the noumena and the transcendent are unknowable but thinkable. According to KCB, both in subject as freedom as well as concept of philosophy, the noumena or the things in themselves are perfectly knowable but not thinkable. And that one has to deal with.
Yes.
But I think the project of not so much as spiritualizing philosophical discussion, which is actually quite a pernicious and dangerous project, because people mean by spiritual, religious, and we are suffering, the whole country, from that. But actually seeing the continuity between not just transcendental deduction of categories, but reflective judgment in the third critique, especially the analytic of the sublime. Seeing how not going beyond, but going behind. So all these object as freedom things are like going towards the unreachable back of the back of the back of the back. So it's like Shrotrasya Shrotram, Manaso Manoyat, Vachoha Vacham. So Pranasya Prana. So going back and back, that is continuous with the search for, unfortunately because of the bad influence of Hegel, he called it search for the absolute in Neo Vedanta. It should be the search for the Pratyagatman, that which is at the back of everything, on which light cannot be thrown. In fact, it is best, even worshipped, as the darkest of all. That there is no light, there is no sun, there is no natatra suryo bhati, na chandra tarakam. And this is not a beyond exercise. So I would slightly disagree in retaining the term transcendent. And I have similar objections to that. But there is a reason why we should call it spiritual. And the reason is very blunt and simple. For the last 50 years, I have been asking smart students, scholars, what does spiritual mean? And I have come to the conclusion that from Shantideva Bodhicharya Avatara to K.C. Bhattacharya, everybody, anyone who has practiced it for even a day, should understand that spiritual means unselfish. And this search for unselfishness, I will show in my paper today, is the search for the most universal logic. Because he says logical egoism is as bad. And I'm hoping that in the paper on hope today, we will see another kind of, it's not through the postulates of morality only, but there is a bridge between a sort of universal background, which is not mine, not yours, in which the first thing that happens is that this is an original point, first time I made, this is my insight, you give that up. And then insight starts. So if one could, but unfortunately, like Simone de Beauvoir said in The Second Sex, describing the difficulty of housework, that the battle against dust is never won by a housewife. The battle against egotism is never won.
Yes. Yes. No, I mean, thank you very much. I don't really have anything to add to this or to respond to this. But I am, I feel very uncomfortable with a large number of, once again, with due respect to them, Indian philosophers trained in analytic, so-called Anglo-American analytic philosophy, where they think that talking about spirituality in the realm of philosophy is a major no-no. I can give you evidence. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of that. Okay. This is something I feel very uncomfortable with. The more I'm reading all this stuff. And I think K.C. Bhattacharya is a very, very good example of that. That is why I use the word spiritualism. I know that there are lots of, there might be lots of confusions about that, but I think we should more talk about this. And I think KCB's, appropriation of Kantian insights if we can talk about that at all, is definitely one of these.
That is an outdated version of Indian art.
I don't think anything is outdated in philosophy. I don't think so. I mean, we can talk about Plato, Aristotle. If we can talk about Kant 300 years after Kant was born, I don't think. I don't think it is outdated.
I'm sorry to, kind of intervene. This could have been extremely